Hello everyone and welcome to the Autism Education Trust. This short briefing is for anybody working within an educational setting. It focuses on supporting autistic pupils to successfully return to education. It is aimed at anybody working within an educational setting, no matter how much direct contact that you have with autistic pupils. And that's because our research and our Young People's Panel have told us how important it is that the whole workforce has at least a basic understanding of autism and the additional challenges that autistic pupils face. We hope that by the end of this session, you will have an understanding of the transitions that autistic pupils might find difficult, understand the areas of difference associated with autism and how these can impact upon transitions, and to understand potential strengths of autistic pupils and how you can use these to support transitions. The change of transition of any kind is particularly difficult for pupils on the autism spectrum, and it can be a cause of anxiety. And this is because an autistic pupil might find the world a very confusing place because it's hard for them to predict what's going to happen next or to understand what is expected of them. And a transition can be seen as either a big or a small transition. It may be moving from one location to another or between activities in the same location. So some transitions that autistic pupils may find difficult may be leaving the house again on a regular and daily basis. So during lockdown, during the COVID-19 pandemic, pupils will have spent a lot of time at home. And at home, they will have had a safe, predictable environment. So the thought of going back outside again, where it's very unpredictable, can be a cause of anxiety and can cause that increasing anxiety for pupils. Relationship transitions. So, for example, they will have spent a lot of time at home and having that one-to-one support, most likely from a parent. So separation anxiety may be a difficulty when considering transition back to education setting. And also being out of a familiar routine, so having to get up at the same time every day or go to bed early at night so they can get up in the morning to go to school. That may cause some pupils a little bit of time to get used to. They may also find it difficult to learn in a space again with an increased number of people. So the learning at home will have been managed very differently to the learning in school, and there will have been access to breaks, regular breaks when needed, and the environment would have been a low arousal environment, most likely, and it would have been predictable and a safe environment. So the pupil may now find it difficult to go back to a learning environment with lots of different people and distractions. And then completing consecutive tasks with fewer breaks may be challenging. And moving from one classroom to another or between one activity to another may be challenging. And that's why it's really important to use visual supports, use a now and next board, especially if the pupil is transitioning between unfamiliar environments. So you can help to significantly reduce anxiety and increase focus by answering just 4 basic but essential questions. So let the pupil know, what am I doing? How long am I going to be doing it for? What am I going to be doing next? And when will I be doing the thing that I really want to do? And some autistic pupils will also benefit from knowing how do I start an activity and how do I know when I have finished? So we'll now look at the 4 areas of difference in more detail, specifically in relation to transitions. And this will help you to understand a bit more about why transitions, however big or small, can be very anxiety provoking for autistic pupils. So autism, areas of difference and difficulties with transitions. At the Autism Education Trust, we believe that autism should be seen as a difference and not a deficit. And autistic children and young people experience differences in 4 key areas, which we will look in a bit more detail at. So these are communication, social understanding, sensory sensitivities, and then the differences in being able to process information and plan. So here are some things that are linked to communication that might increase anxiety for autistic pupils when returning to an education setting. So a sudden increase in the expectation to communicate. The communication demands at home will undoubtedly be very different to those at school. And a return to school will mean that autistic pupils have to face increased demands with likely to be more people who are less familiar to them. And that can cause anxiety because they may not know how to respond to that person if they don't know them that well, or what's expected of them in a social situation. And they're likely to need additional support with that. So there may be a reduced tolerance to the daily demand of being asked to sit and listen, and difficulty in being able to express how they are feeling or what their emotions are at that time. So if there are unfamiliar staff, the pupil may have difficulty asking for help or asking to take a break. But if they're becoming very overwhelmed, it's important that they do have a safe space to go to where they can take a break and have the means of being able to request this. And it's important that they do become familiar with the adult that's working with them and that they have a way of being able to communicate how they're feeling. And not being given extra time to process information or instructions can cause distress in autistic pupils. And so it's really important to make sure that when you are giving instructions, you always allow that extra time for them to process, and also give information with visual supports where possible. Here are some things linked to social interaction that might cause anxiety in autistic pupils with the return to education. So sudden increase in demands around social interactions and chit chat with peers, or understanding new rules. So for example, understanding the rules around social distancing. So difficulties in interpreting social cues that an autistic person may not know how to behave in a social environment. It's likely that it will take them longer to understand the expectations and the social rules of a new environment or social situation. A loss of social skills due to lack of use in lockdown. So there may have been a loss in not using those skills, or a loss in the confidence to use social skills, and the ability to socialise with their peers. They may not have had that opportunity during lockdown, or it will have been very reduced. And there may have been some changes to the dynamics in friendship groups. And these changes can be particularly difficult for autistic pupils to manage, and it can leave them very vulnerable to bullying. And then there's the desire to remain in the environment of home that's more predictable, less socially restrictive environment, less noisy, less busy. And so a lot of pupils may prefer to stay at home and may be anxious about going back to school when there's lots of people going to be around and things will have changed. But on a positive note, there will be some while there will be social rules to learn, returning to a socially distanced classroom actually might be more preferable for some autistic pupils. And if there are less pupils, then it might be a less stimulating environment. So it will be a lower arousal environment, more structured, and that might actually benefit some autistic pupils. So here are some things linked to sensory sensitivities that might increase the anxiety of autistic pupils returning to education. So being less able to take movement or rest breaks when they want to, or engaging in self-stimulatory behaviour to help them to cope with their environment, and overall being overstimulated by the education environment and what's going on around them. And then also having to wear uniform again can cause anxiety, because the material of which may feel uncomfortable or even painful. And on return to an education setting, autistic pupils are likely to be much more sensitive to the noise and commotion, having had that time at home. And they've probably been able to move around as they wish and take breaks as and when they've needed to, and learn in different levels of comfort. So now they will be they won't be able to do so as freely, and it might feel very restrictive. And they may be able to or may not be able to cope with being overloaded by the sensory stimulus in the environment, and that may cause a lot of anxiety. So here are some things linked to information processing and planning differences that can cause anxiety in autistic pupils when they're returning to education. So the need to navigate an adapted environment, so getting used to new rules such as a one-way system around school. So the ability to adapt going back to school will be very difficult for some autistic pupils, and the structure of the day and their routines will have changed dramatically. They will have difficulty with the organisational skills required to survive the day, and they may struggle with recalling some relevant information, so things that they've learnt previously that they're expected to recall for learning this term. And then being given the option of making choices again might be overwhelming. So the fear of not knowing what to do or what is not happening next will increase anxiety. And this anxiety further hinders the autistic child or young person's ability to process information. And as a result, they will want to stick with what's familiar. And that's why it's very important to focus on what's familiar throughout the transition process where possible. So that could be the same classroom, the same teacher, or the same support staff, for example. So strengths and strategies that will help support transition. If we use an individual's areas of strengths, we can make transitions more successful. So it can really help to come from a strengths-based perspective and be creative in your thinking about how you can support each individual pupil's transitions. So there are some strengths that will help you support them with their transition. So think about what motivates the child. So they can be really good at concentrating and can show intense concentration when they're motivated and when the sensory environment is right, so there's not too many distractions. So think about what they like to do, what are their dislikes, and how can you make sure that the environment has few distractions. They're very good at attention to detail and can be capable of extensive research and focus on special interests, and at times very good at following rules and boundaries as long as they're very clear and in place all the time. So you will have to think about how you can make the transition bespoke to each pupil. Think about how you can personalise the learning to meet the pupil's needs during the transition, and allow that additional time to spend on their special interests to re-engage the pupil at the very beginning of transition. The actions that could help. Allow additional time for the autistic pupil to get used to the school environment again, making those reasonable adjustments in managing their distress behaviours. Allow pupils to access sensory equipment when they're needed to manage their sensory sensitivities. So they may engage in self-stimulatory behaviour as a way of coping, but you could, for example, provide some ear defenders that will help them to block out the noise and the disruption of the environment around them. Autistic pupils are likely to benefit from frequent exercise, so getting away from sitting and listening and learning and the demands that puts on them. And making sure that you've created these safe, clearly marked spaces where they can go to calm down, and that they have a way of requesting this if they're very overwhelmed or becoming anxious or distressed, that they know where they can go to and they have a way of asking, and that they give them permission to do so. And always present information in a very clear and concise way with visual supports where possible. So for further resources, do visit our website at www.autismeducationtrust.org.uk. And the AET is here to help you to support autistic children and young people transition back to an education setting during the COVID-19 pandemic. Please visit our website and look specifically at our COVID-19 Information Centre, where you will find a range of useful information. This information includes materials about going back to school, including a 6 Tools for Teachers resource and strategies on how to support autistic pupils who are in a heightened state of anxiety. And also there is some information about the changes to the SEND legislation, some examples of social stories that you can use, and articles by autism education specialists and training partners. We do hope that you found this briefing useful.